very much for joining us this morning, and I'd just like to make a few comments up front, and then obviously happy to answer any questions which you may have. But firstly, through you, the multicultural media, if I could say a very big thank you to the multicultural community of Australia, who, like all Australians, have been absolutely outstanding in terms of how they have responded to the enhanced restrictions which have been placed upon Australians in recent times. So I want to say a very big thank you. You are making an enormous difference. You are saving lives and you are saving livelihoods in the process. So thank you. Can I also just say thank you as well for all of the tremendous work which you are doing in terms of supporting each other, and particularly for all of those multicultural community groups who I know are doing so much great work in supporting members of their community, whether it be through food distributions or through supporting people who might be isolated, living by themselves, through other mechanisms. I'm aware of dozens and dozens of community organisations doing that, and so thank you for that effort. And finally, thank you for helping to share and distribute accurate information in relation to the corona crisis, particularly the multicultural leaders who have been doing such a good job in that regard. I've been engaging with them deeply over the last few weeks through having a series of roundtable discussions via video conference. I just had a further one this morning, but each of those groups have stepped up, supported their communities, helped with the dissemination of accurate information so that everybody, all Australians, can understand exactly what is required of them. Next, can I say that in relation to where we are today with COVID-19 and the case numbers, the work which all Australians have done, including multicultural communities, is absolutely making a difference. As of today, there was, this morning, there was 6,415 infections that had been tested and found positive, 49 new cases yesterday. What that means is that the curve has dramatically flattened. You might know that a few weeks ago, we were growing in terms of our case numbers by 25% per day, which means a doubling every few days. But then it dropped down to 15% per day, and then 10, and then 5, and now down to very low figures of growth rate per day. Perhaps most encouragingly is that the number of active cases is actually in decline. And that is, of course, the combination of the number of new cases netted off against the numbers of those who have recovered. And so that's been in slight decline, just ever so slightly, over the last week, and now is below 3,000 active cases. Still a long way to go. And that's my message in part today, is that we still have to be vigilant. This is no time to be complacent, because we still have a journey to travel. But we are doing so well, and thank you so much to the broader multicultural communities for the work which you have done in helping to achieve these great results for Australia. Since we last got together as well, I announced a number of changes to temporary migration visa arrangements. Now, those changes which were announced were based on a number of principles. The first principle being that we are naturally prioritising Australians and permanent residents for the work which is available, for the welfare which we're making available. The second principle being that wherever possible, we are asking temporary visitors to continue the normal expectation that they are able to look after themselves while they are here. But we are helping to facilitate that, and in part through giving them access to their superannuation, and also providing some flexibility to visa arrangements so that they can continue to work even if it is on reduced hours, and yet maintain the validity of their visa. And the third principle being that, of course, we need to maintain our critical industries, and the temporary migration system can help facilitate that. And so through those three principles, we've made a number of changes. I will say that I also announced at the time that those changes will be periodically reviewed. As this coronavirus pandemic evolves, we may have to reassess. We'll periodically review it, but otherwise the announcements which I made a few days ago stand for the moment. Finally, before handing over to you for questions, can I say a thank you to the Multicultural media, again for the work which you have done in disseminating accurate, reliable information. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and we're constantly encouraging all members of the Australian community to rely upon that accurate information, and particularly the australia.gov.au website. There's a WhatsApp app which has also been developed, as well as an app which you can download onto your phone, and that has accurate, reliable information for people to be able to access. I'll also say that that information now is available in 63 different languages. So fact sheets are being translated. We've had the support as well of SBS, where we've developed a partnership with them to be able to disseminate that information, so that that information can get out to those people whose English may be poor. I'll leave it there and just happy to take any questions.
Minister, if the message is for temporary visa holders to go home where they can, would the government add any extra support for them to help them to travel home if they're unable to do so?
Well, that wasn't the message for the visitor visa holders. Was go home if you are unable to be able to support yourself and you're worried about not being able to get a flight. So, and many people have been taking advantage of that. So most visitors are here for 3 months of duration, and I can see from the data that many thousands of people over the last few weeks have taken advantage of the flights. But for other categories of visa holders, we will still need them. For some of the backpackers, we're actually saying that we'll extend your visa if you work in the critical industries, for example. Even some of the international students will say we'll give you more hours to work if you're working in those critical industries. So our message is targeted at different visa category holders, but there is that underlying principle that for temporary visa holders, temporary visitors to Australia, there is the expectation, as has always been the case, that you are able to support yourself.
And so with the tourist visa, or as you said, the visitor visa, can they apply for the pandemic visa you've introduced, or would they need to reapply for the tourist visa instead?
Tourist visas, they will know exactly when their visa is coming to an end, but the overall message is take the opportunity today to get a flight back home where you can get support, particularly if you don't have family support here in Australia, particularly if that's the case. Now, and people are doing that in droves. I'm seeing the data and they're doing that in droves. If somebody is stuck in Australia and they simply cannot get a flight to their destination country because that country may be completely locked down, and there are some countries like that, then of course they should contact the Immigration Department and we would be able to extend their tourist visa so they still have a valid visa while in the country.
And so that might apply to Indian students, for instance. A lot of international Indian students is quite a large group that might be needing that extra help.
Yeah, well, India is one of the cases where, as you probably know, the Modi government has completely closed down all the international airports. Now, it was scheduled to reopen this week, but they've made a decision to extend the closure of those international airports for another few weeks. So we just have to keep a watching eye on that. Nepal is in a similar situation at the moment, and we have large numbers of people in Australia from those two countries. So we're keeping a close eye on that. We're looking at the data. We know when people's visas are due to expire. And as I said, for those tourists who are here, whose visas are due to expire, who are concerned that they cannot get home, then they should contact the Immigration Department as a matter of urgency.
We have a lot of readers at Nels Cosmos who are in that position, and they say that they cannot afford a flight back, and they run out of money. What do we do for these people whose visas have expired and they're stranded and in limbo and they can't afford
To which country? I didn't hear what you said.
Greece.
To Greece. I mean, there are still flights back to Europe at the moment, as you're no doubt aware. And I haven't got the exact numbers of tourists from Greece in front of me. But again, we're encouraging them where they can to get a flight home. Now, when you come out as a tourist, obviously the expectation is that you'll come out, you'll be able to support yourself and you'll be able to get a flight home. The expectation is that you'll have private health insurance. In fact, that's often a condition of the visa as well, so that if you get in trouble from a health perspective, that you'll be able to look after yourself as well. So I'd just encourage people to continue to look and search for those flights if they are worried about it, if they need. If there are literally no flights and they are concerned that their visa is coming to an end, and therefore would be unlawful in Australia because they don't have a valid visa, then they should call the Immigration Department as a matter of urgency.
Sir, there are so many temporary visa holders who are stuck in overseas, and they have their assets here, they have their cars, they are paying rents. What's your plan for them?
For temporary visa holders who are
stuck overseas.
Who are stuck overseas. I mean, listen, unfortunately, the case at the moment is that our borders are closed down, and those borders are closed for a very good reason, and that is because the vast majority of the coronavirus infections were coming from people who were travelling back into Australia. Now, of course, if you're an Australian citizen or a permanent resident, you are able still to come back to Australia, but you must go into self-isolation, and that's been strictly policed now to reduce that infection rate. But it's otherwise it's the circumstances for those individuals, and I understand it's very difficult, but they will no doubt be back in their home country and hopefully have that support there.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
This is Citizenship from your time. I just want to know, do you have numbers, how many international students having here and how many Indian in here?
Indian international students there are in Australia at the moment.
Yeah.
I'll be able to get you that precise figure. The number of international students just a few days ago was 561,000. Listen, I would guess that there's probably, of that, probably 20% would be Indian students, so maybe 100,000.
Okay.
So, yeah, and they're in different categories, of course. And I made this point when I did the announcement of the visa classes for those first year students, of which a significant proportion will be first year students. They had to declare in their visa application that they're able to fully support themselves in their first year without work, just being able to fully support themselves. So we expect them to be able to do exactly that. With the second, third and subsequent year students, we're asking them to lean on your family if your family's able to support you, to use your savings. We will give you access to your superannuation, and you may have a few $1,000s there. And of course, you can still do up to 20 hours a week of work, of which many people take advantage of. And there is still some work available in that regard. I further said, though, in relation to international students, that we will keep a watching eye on this, and that we will continue to engage with the international education sector and the different community groups in relation to it. Many of the universities, who comprise the vast bulk of international students, have got hardship provisions already in place. In fact, $110 million has already been publicly announced by universities to support students who may find themselves into financial difficulty. And so we thank them for that as well, and we continue to engage with the universities in relation to it.
Just a question about insurance. If temporary visa holders test positive to coronavirus, would the Australian government offer them medical support, or would you, as you say,
so generally the answer is yes, that people are going to be tested and people aren't going to be discriminated against in terms of getting that support.
And in terms of
Yes, okay, please.
sure. Oh, just in terms of detention centres, I just wondered what measures are in place for people there, and is that different to how prisons are operating as well?
Yeah, so in the detention centres, to date there has been no infection in detention centres, but we obviously monitor that very closely. And while there's no infection there, we of course have put in place other measures to prevent there being infections into those detention centres, because we don't want it to occur. And that includes having fewer visitations, for example. But we've also got in place plans should a infection arise, and we will be able to put those plans into place. But we're very hopeful that no infections will go into those detention centres.
Yes, thank you for all the way you're coming again, second time, putting our national interest. And my question, thanks for that last first meeting, that small business superannuation access, and thanks for the treasurer and PM to understand our situation and given the access. And number two, now my question is, our street in Australia is an order, but our home is not an order. Having said this, how we are going to put restriction on import duty based on products, also goods and services, because when I am exporting to India, India putting 35% import duty on nutritional milk powder, Australian made, and top of that GST.
Yes.
And GST we don't know when going to come, maybe 5 years after we will get it. But we are paying the import duty. And when we are importing from India, so just maybe 10% or something, so really that revenue will bring the Australian benefit. So we have to rethink our trade minister and to have a meeting again here with the multicultural community, that we have a contributing the economy so much in future and in the past. So we need a consultation with the multicultural community. There are the possibilities, make in India, like make in Australia. So we have this COVID-19 give a great awareness to rethink that to people are nowadays buying. See, if you can't buy, I'm not a racist, you can't buy a piece of land in China, aren't you? So they are buying like anything, and half of the Australia is already been sold. And number two, that what is now the government is seriously thinking to benefit of our Australians, an Australian businessman, whatever we make money, stay home in Australia to create a local jobs. Thank you.
So a few issues there in relation to the import and export of goods and the taxes which are applied on those goods. That's really a decision for the Trade Minister and the Treasurer in relation to that. In relation to, foreign ownership of housing, which I know you asked, or land, which I know you asked there, it's not correct. Your assertions are not correct. There is a foreign interest register now as well, which tracks exactly all the foreign ownership of land. And there was several years ago, in fact, the coalition government introduced some further restrictions on foreign ownership of existing residential properties, such that a foreign owner can only purchase an existing residential property to live in, and then must sell that within 3 months of them no longer living in that property. And that's why for people who have purchased property in recent years, you'll know that you have to fill in a declaration which says the fact that you are Australian and not a foreign citizen. And sorry, what was your last point again?
Again, the import duty on the goods and services.
Yeah, so that's one for the Treasurer and the Trade Minister, so I can't comment on that one.
Yeah,
today.
and can I request you to come on to talk to us with the multicultural
Yeah, of course.
media? So our business, small business, is taking the how to
More than
protect
happy.
our
More than happy to follow up with individual cases,
Yeah.
or indeed to speak
no,
individually.
in general, because in a lot of our multicultural
Yeah.
business, small business people thinking now to start manufacturing in Australia.
Yes.
So, because the now time has come to manufacture in Australia.
Well, I hope
Before
they.
not,
I
because
hope
everything
they
is
do.
made in China, made in China. Everywhere you go, made in China and made in China. And this is a dumping site for the made in China product.
No, it's that again. I won't agree with your assertions in that question. So it's not the case. There's a lot of terrific products which we get from China, of course, you know, we have an important relationship with China, and that will be maintained. Any other questions?
Can I ask about your regular work? A lot of people who are already waiting for their visas and their citizenship are worried that the coronavirus might affect their appeals and their wait. Is there a longer backlog, or is work proceeding as normal? Is it faster or slower? What do you see?
Yeah, citizenship is a difficult one. Obviously, citizenship ceremonies have had to change because we can't have big groups of people gathering together. And so what we have introduced instead, I'm sorry for the noise in the background where there's clearly some construction work going on outside, but in relation to citizenship ceremonies, instead we've put in place a mechanism whereby people can still become a citizen, but they will do so via a video hookup with an individual, and it'll be one individual at a time. We have to make sure that the proper identity is done, the proper declarations are done. So that process is still continuing, and I know that many people are really wanting to become a citizen as quickly as possible. I can completely understand that, and that's why we want to put those mechanisms in place. We're still working through in terms of other people who are at the beginning of their journey, even in terms of doing English language testing and some of the other tests which you have to do before you even get to the ceremony. They're more complex because typically the English language tests have been done in a room with people close, you know, face to face. So we're still working through how that might be able to be done. But in the meantime, we haven't got that operational right now. Now, in other visas that are being processed, yes, other visas are being processed where people are in the country. But obviously offshore visas, we're often being impeded in terms of the processing of offshore visas, in part for similar reasons. It's actually the English language testing, the medical testing, often those things have come to a close because of COVID-19 in those other countries, as opposed to necessarily the processing which has been done. But unless you're a permanent resident, you can't come into Australia at the moment, or a citizen, of course. So that's the situation now. So,
in the last few days, Mr. Prime Minister said that there are temporary visas. If they are unable to take care of their living, they can move back. So is there any kind of possibility in the next few days, few weeks, the temporary residence or student visa, it's going to be hard for them to get the visas?
for international students who are abroad or who are in Australia?
Yeah, we're abroad because as we can see, there are not much jobs left as well, and it's
Yeah.
going to come to an end as well. So there's not going to be jobs they can support their studies and everything else. So is it going to be difficult for them to get the visas?
Well, if they've already got, you're saying they've already got a valid visa.
No, who didn't got the visa yet, who have
Oh,
plans
who are
to
in
study
Australia.
future in Australia,
Okay.
who are planning to get a permanent residency or moving from work visas to another visas.
To a student visa. I mean, if they're moving from one visa to another, there's no reason to prevent becoming a student, for example, from Australia. Now, of course, you wouldn't be able to do that from abroad because you wouldn't be able to get into the country. But there's nothing to prevent somebody who's transferring from one visa class applying to become an international student. And by being an international student, obviously there's fees attached to that, but there are some work rights attached to that as well of 40 hours per fortnight. Thank you.
Just one other area, your government in language app, I know you mentioned the 63 languages, are there plans to extend that further or maybe use contact tracing information as part of that?
So we've done a lot of work in terms of getting the translations done, and particularly with the partnership with SBS, who have been terrific in this regard. And so now any of the fact sheets which are being developed are being translated into those languages. We haven't got plans at this stage to extend it beyond the 63 languages. But then we're also asking some of the multicultural community leaders to also use those fact sheets. Sometimes I know that they're doing videos in their own language as well, based off the fact sheets, because that'll be a clearer way to communicate. We're also starting to, not starting, have been for some time now, putting some of the social media tiles and other advertising in place in different languages as well.
See, another question. I received an email from the family, Indian community family. Their two sons they are living here, and father is living here, mother stuck in India.
Yes.
So there are some possibilities to come to join the reunion with the.
But
But they have an Indian passport and have a valid visa for visit to Australia.
and that unfortunately that won't be possible at the moment. And I know that causes angst to many people, but it's simply not possible at the moment.
Oh.
Now, unless they've got a permanent residency visa, they won't be able to get into the country. Unless there is exceptional circumstances. The Australian Border Force Commissioner still has discretion for exceptional circumstances, but they are exceptional. And I wouldn't suspect that one in and of itself would satisfy that criteria.
So they have to wait for till the
But
crisis.
unfortunately, they'll have to wait for the borders to be lifted following the pandemic subsiding. Okay,
So,
last question.
So the coronavirus infection rate already, the flat and the already under control now. Any idea when you are going to take over restrictions? What you guys do?
No, and again, I wouldn't agree with the premise of your question that it's completely under control now. It's the curve has flattened, and we're pleased with the results which all Australians have contributed to. But as we've seen, even in places like Singapore, you can very quickly get an uptick in the spread of the virus again if you relax the restrictions too soon. So we're still taking this very carefully, and the Prime Minister has outlined obviously a number of preconditions which need to be put in place before any relaxation might be able to be put in place. All right, thanks very much everybody.